I should have known something was off the moment I stepped into the house. An eerie silence hung in the air, a stark contrast to the usual bickering between my husband Connor and his son Alex. Instinctively, I moved closer to the study, the voices becoming clearer with each step. "It's the perfect solution. She'll never suspect a thing." Connor's muffled tone resonated, laced with an unsettling smugness. My heart raced as I pressed my ear against the door, Alex's voice joining the sinister exchange. "You're certain this poison will work gradually? I don't want her dying too quickly before we can access those assets." I gasped, clapping a hand over my mouth to muffle the sound. My mind whirled, struggling to process the unthinkable words they had uttered, a heinous plot against my very life. The doorknob twisted and I scrambled away, my breath catching in my throat as Connor emerged. His eyes narrowed slightly at my presence before a sickening smile stretched across his lips. "There you are, dear. Alex and I were just discussing some business matters." Lies dripped from his forked tongue like venom as Alex slinked out behind him, his reptilian gaze sizing me up like a prize to be claimed. "Is everything all right?" Connor asked with feigned concern, placing a clammy hand on my shoulder. "You look a tad pale." I swallowed hard, mustering every ounce of composure to disguise the maelstrom of emotions raging within me. Fear, anger, disbelief, they swirled together in a toxic concoction, threatening to spill over with the slightest provocation. "I'm fine," I lied through gritted teeth, offering a tight-lipped smile that concealed the churning turmoil. "Just feeling a bit lightheaded, that's all." Connor's brow furrowed with mock worry as he ushered me towards the kitchen. "Why don't you sit down and have some water? I'll whip up something for you to eat." The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as his words took on an insidious new meaning. Was this the beginning of their twisted scheme? Would they truly stoop so low as to poison me, their own family, for financial gain? I watched in tense silence as Connor busied himself at the counter, his movements almost mocking in their nonchalance. A glance towards Alex revealed his eyes fixated on me, a sinister glint dancing within their depths like a predator eyeing its defenseless prey. In that moment, a fire ignited within me, a fierce, uncompromising blaze that would not be extinguished. I would not be the victim in this twisted tale. I would be the architect of their undoing. Gripping the glass of water, I met Connor's gaze with an unwavering stare as he approached. A silent challenge burned in my eyes, one he seemed oblivious to in his arrogance. "Drink up, sweetheart," he cooed, that sickening smile never faltering. "You'll be feeling better in no time." As I raised the glass to my lips, a single thought crystallized with resolute clarity. If it was war they wanted, it was war they would get, and I would show no mercy in dismantling their vile scheme piece by wretched piece until justice and retribution were finally served. In the days that followed, I became a silent observer, my ears pricked for any shred of information that could aid my cause. Connor and Alex seemed to carry on as usual, their facade of normalcy only strengthening my resolve. It was Eva, my dearest friend, who provided the first glimmer of hope. Over coffee one afternoon, I finally confided in her about the harrowing conversation I'd overheard, the words tumbling out in a torrent of anger and disbelief. Her eyes widened with horror, but her resolve never wavered. "We need to gather evidence, Lila, build an airtight case against those snakes." I nodded, the first twinges of purpose igniting within me. Eva was right. I couldn't simply confront them without proof. I needed ammunition, and I needed it fast. That evening, I took stock of our finances with renewed scrutiny. Missing funds, suspicious transactions, hidden debts, the trail of deceit woven by Connor and Alex gradually revealed itself bit by bit. "You seem awfully focused on those statements," Connor remarked over dinner, his tone laced with artificial nonchalance. "Anything interesting?" I met his gaze levelly, unwilling to betray the hatred simmering beneath the surface. "Just doing a little financial housekeeping." His brows rose in mock surprise before he shrugged, returning his attention to the meal before him, the very picture of apathy towards my growing suspicion. In the ensuing weeks, I became a master of deception, feigning illness while meticulously cataloging every illicit transaction, every underhanded move made by those snakes. All the while, I leaned on Eva, her steadfast support and strategic counsel proving invaluable. "We're getting closer," she assured me one evening as we pored over the mounting evidence. Soon, we'll have everything we need to bring them down. Connor's smug indifference only added fuel to the fire burning within me. Did he truly believe I was some wilting flower, too feeble and foolish to unravel his tangled web of lies? He was gravely mistaken. It was Alex, however, whose malice truly sent tendrils of ice through my veins. I witnessed firsthand the contemptuous glares he aimed my way, the undisguised loathing simmering in those cold, dead eyes. "Better watch your back," he muttered under his breath as he brushed past me in the hallway one day. "Wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen." The pointed remark was a harsh reminder of the venom coursing through their veins, a poisonous hatred that threatened to consume us all if left unchecked. But I was no fragile victim to be cowed by such thinly veiled threats. I was a woman reborn, fueled by a thirst for justice too long denied. With Eva's help, I would tear down the facade of lies they'd so carefully constructed, exposing the rot that festered at their very core. One by one, I would dismantle their lives, just as they had aimed to destroy mine. It was only a matter of time before the depraved depths of their betrayal came to light. And when that day arrived, I would be waiting, not with fear, but with the cold, hard promise of retribution. With each passing day, I immersed myself deeper into the role fate had cruelly thrust upon me, that of the overlooked, ailing wife. It became a twisted charade, one that allowed me to secretly advance my plans while flying completely under Connor and Alex's radar. "You're looking particularly pale this morning," Connor observed over breakfast one morning, his tone a perverse blend of faux concern and undisguised indifference. I offered a weak smile, feigning a weariness that would soon become my reluctant ally. "Just feeling a bit drained lately." His gaze drifted back to his plate with a dismissive shrug. "Well, you'd better rest up. We've got the Benson event this weekend, and I can't have you embarrassing me in front of potential clients." The words oozed with thinly veiled condescension, but I bit back the torrent of rage bubbling within me. Antagonizing him would only undermine the delicate fiction I was so carefully crafting. In the days that followed, I allowed myself to grow increasingly lethargic, my movements slowing to a sluggish crawl that couldn't be mistaken for anything other than infirmity. "Christ, you look like death warmed over," Alex sneered as I shuffled into the living room, sinking onto the couch with a weary sigh. Mustering what little energy I could, I leveled him with a pointed glare. "It must be that stomach virus going around." His expression morphed into one of poorly concealed disdain before he rose from his chair, muttering a parting remark too vile to repeat as he stalked away. With him gone, I allowed the mask to slip, my lips curling into a grim smile. If only he knew the true purpose behind my increasingly haggard appearance, to lull him and his loathsome father into a false sense of complacency. As the weeks ticked by, I turned my attention to securing my assets, meticulously siphoning funds and making arrangements through Eva's trusted network of contacts. A new identity, complete with fresh credentials and a pristine record, would be my safety net when the time came to escape this waking nightmare. "You've got to hang in there," Eva murmured to me during one of our clandestine meetings, her eyes shining with a combination of worry and fierce determination. "We're almost there." I nodded weakly, allowing my body to slump in a semblance of debilitating frailty. "Don't worry about me. Just make sure everything is in place for when the time comes." Her jaw tightened, and she gave a curt nod before rising to leave, the weight of our shared mission heavy between us. With each rattling cough, each tremor that racked my body, I could see Connor and Alex's contempt growing. Their once cutting remarks had given way to stretches of stony silence, punctuated only by the occasional snide glance in my direction. Did they sense the game afoot, or were they simply biding their time, eager to shed the burden of my existence so they could slither away with my hard-earned wealth? The thought was like gasoline on the flames of my hatred, stoking the inferno that would ultimately consume them. Finally, the night before the pivotal Benson event arrived, heralding the next phase of my intricately woven plan. "Well, you certainly don't look fit to attend tomorrow's function," the Connor remarked with an air of poorly disguised annoyance as I took my place at the dinner table. "Maybe it's best you sit this one out, dear. Wouldn't want you to keel over in front of everyone." His lips curved into a serpentine smile. dark amusement dancing in his beady eyes. I allowed my gaze to drift away, feigning a weary capitulation that he no doubt interpreted as weakness. Little did he know, it was the calm before the storm. The final moments of peace before I obliterated his pathetic delusions of control. As the first twinges of nausea blossomed within me, I steadied my quivering hands against the table's edge, steeling my resolve for the trials yet to come. They thought they had broken me, body and spirit, but by dawn's first light, the game would be forever changed, and Connor and Alex would soon discover they had succeeded only in awakening a force more powerful than any they could possibly fathom. With my newfound air of frailty firmly in place, it was time to set the next phase of my plan into motion. Connor and Alex may have thought me a helpless invalid, but they were about to discover just how debilitating their own arrogance could be. It started small. The subtle planting of suspicious evidence designed to make it appear as though Connor was engaged in a tawdry affair. A lingering spritz of unfamiliar cologne, a swirl of red lipstick on his shirt collar, furtive glances and whispered phone calls when he thought no one was watching. At first, the sign seemed to go unnoticed by those snakes. But I was patient, allowing the seeds of doubt to germinate until their poisonous tendrils could no longer be ignored. It was Alex who finally confronted his father, his anger boiling over during a heated argument one evening. "Who is she?" he snarled, slamming his fist on the table with a force that made me start. "Don't even try to deny it. I've seen the evidence." Connor's eyes widened in what I could only assume was feigned shock and bewilderment. "What the hell are you going on about, boy?" The lipstick stains, the hushed phone calls. Alex's voice dripped with venom as he leaned across the table, his eyes narrowing to slits of pure venom. "You're cheating on us with some cheap whore, aren't you?" The muscles in Connor's jaw twitched as he absorbed the accusation. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw a flash of guilt in those cold, dead eyes. But like any master of deception, the expression was gone in an instant, replaced by one of towering indignation. "How dare you accuse me of such a thing?" he roared, slamming his palms on the table with enough force to rattle the plates and cutlery. "I've given you everything, a home, an education, a life of luxury, and this is how you repay me?" As the two men descended into a maelstrom of bitter recriminations, I watched in silence, allowing the rift I had so carefully cultivated to deepen and fester. Like a master chemist, I had introduced the volatile elements and stepped back, observing as the inevitable explosion tore them apart. In the ensuing days, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Connor and Alex regarded one another with unveiled hostility, their interactions reduced to terse exchange loaded with thinly veiled accusations. "Where were you until so late last night?" Alex demanded one morning as we sat down to breakfast, his eyes boring into his father with an intensity that would have incinerated a lesser man. "Out with your whore again?" Connor slammed his coffee mug down with enough force to slosh the steaming liquid over the rim. "Watch your insolent tongue, boy. You know nothing of the sacrifices I've made to provide for this family." As their quarrel escalated, I found myself tuning out their specific grievances, allowing the general din of enmity to wash over me. Like a composer, I had orchestrated this discordant crescendo through the skilled manipulation of evidence, and the results were even more glorious than I could have imagined. With father and son torn asunder by suspicion and betrayal, the stage was set for the next, more explosive act in my carefully choreographed theater of vengeance. While they postured and snarled, consumed by the flames of manufactured enmity, I bided my time, a silent, unassuming specter merely awaiting her moment to strike. That moment was coming soon. All that remained was to goad the snakes into striking the fateful blow that would ultimately spell their demise. And I knew just the provocation to rattle them from their coils of seething resentment. So I watched and I waited for the perfect opportunity. And when it came, I would be ready to deliver the grand performance of a lifetime. With Connor and Alex's relationship crumbling under the weight of suspicion and hatred I had so expertly cultivated, it was time to deliver the final, decisive stroke that would bring their bitter animosity to an explosive head. The opportunity presented itself one evening as we sat down for a painfully tense family dinner. The atmosphere was thick with resentment, weighted silences punctuated only by the occasional hostile glare or muttered insult exchanged between father and son. Clearing my throat, I adopted my most frail, wilting demeanor as all eyes turned towards me. "I'm afraid I have some distressing news to share." Connor's eyes narrowed to slits of pure venom. "Out with it, then. Don't keep us in suspense." Feigning a tremulous sigh, I twisted my fingers together in a show of profound unease. "It's about the—" I swallowed hard, as if struggling to give voice to some unutterable truth. "The other woman." The words struck like a thunderclap, the air instantly charged with a scorching current of suspicion and fury. Connor shot to his feet, lips peeled back in a wordless snarl of outrage, as Alex leaned forward, eyes glittering with vindicated accusation. "You lying, cheating bastard," the younger man spat, his voice dripping with vitriol. "I knew you had a whore on the side." In one deft motion, I slid a crumpled photograph across the table, one carefully culled from the cache of evidence I had compiled, then artfully staged to capture Connor in a seeming tryst. His brow creased with bewilderment as he snatched it up, only for the expression to contort into one of impotent rage. "This," he slammed the damning image down with enough force to rattle the tableware. "This is a lie, a twisted, malicious lie." "Is it?" I asked softly, affecting a wounded, almost pleading tone. "Because it would certainly explain your recent indiscretions. The phone calls, the late nights, that strange perfume I've been smelling." Alex was on his feet now, hands balled into white-knuckled fists as he advanced on his father like a coiled serpent. "You smug, self-righteous prick. You've been cheating on us this whole time, haven't you? Carrying on with some two-bit tramp while stringing us along with your lies." It happened in a blur. A flash of movement coupled with an inarticulate bellow of fury as Connor launched himself at his son. The two men collapsed in a tangle of flailing limbs, grunts and curses rent the air as they grappled across the hardwood floor like battling behemoths. I watched, unmoving, as the maelstrom of violence unfolded before me. Let them rend and tear at each other, consumed by the all-devouring flames of hatred I had so carefully stoked within their blackened souls. It was only fitting that I allow them to deliver the fatal wounds that would ultimately seal their demise. At last, Connor managed to pin his son in a chokehold, his teeth bared in a revolting rictus of animalistic fury as Alex's face purpled beneath the onslaught. Revulsion warred with triumph as I observed the spectacle, the gruesome drama playing out exactly as I had orchestrated. Only when it seemed the younger man's eyes would bulge from their sockets did I finally act, fumbling for my phone to hit the record button. Let them have their brutal rematch, their primal showdown of rage and savagery. I would simply sit back and document their sordid performance for posterity. When the dust settled and the violence had finally abated, two battered, heaving combatants glared at each other across the ravaged battlefield of the dining room. Chests rising and falling in ragged desperation, they seemed to realize the depravity of the spectacle they had just enacted. A fractured chuckle, raw and bitter, escaped my lips as I pocketed my phone, the deed accomplished. "Well," I said, my voice steady, despite the turmoil whirling within me like a cyclone of long-suppressed fury. "I'd say the two of you have given me plenty of reasons to revise my will, haven't you?" As their eyes met mine, I saw the first flicker of uncertainty creep across their brutish features. Let them wonder, I thought with grim satisfaction. The game was truly afoot, and there would be no winners, only survivors. In the aftermath of Connor and Alex's explosive clash, a pall of uneasy silence hung over the house like a suffocating shroud. The two snakes seemed chastened in the wake of their primal outburst, slinking through the halls with furtive unease as I remained a specter on the periphery, watching, waiting. It was time to deliver the next punishing volley in my intricately orchestrated downfall. With Eva's assistance, I had already put the necessary pieces in motion to bring this whole sordid affair to its inevitable, karmic conclusion. The first salvo came in the form of an urgent summons from Dr. Harris, our longtime family physician. I arrived at his office feigning a mask of profound frailty, clutching Eva's arm for support as I shuffled inside like a woman treading the precipice of oblivion. "Ah, Lila," the doctor murmured, rising to greet me with solicitous concern etched into his weathered features. "I'm afraid the test results aren't good." My eyes widened with a pantomime of innocent alarm. "What do you mean? What's wrong?" Dr. Harris shook his head, expression grave. "It would appear your condition is more advanced than we initially feared. I'm so very sorry, my dear." The words hung in the air like a stifling miasma weighted with unspoken implications too terrible to fully grasp. Beside me, Eva sagged against my shoulder, overcome with exaggerated emotion as I struggled to maintain my composure. It was all an intricate fiction, of course, a carefully constructed narrative designed to lure Connor and Alex into a state of utterly disarming vulnerability before delivering the coup de grace. Still, I could not resist a flicker of dark satisfaction at the evident torment contorting the doctor's features. Let him marinate in the guilt and misery for now. Soon enough he would learn I had merely engaged him as an unwitting actor in my grand theater of retribution. When Connor and Alex were finally summoned to the office under the pretense of being briefed on my condition, their reactions were a study in callous indifference. While Eva openly wept beside me, their faces remained chiseled masks of stony impassivity, utterly devoid of anything resembling human compassion or empathy. "Well?" Connor prompted, his tone brusque and impatient as he leveled Dr. Harris with an expectant stare. "What's the prognosis, Doc? Out with it." The doctor sighed, rubbing his temples in a show of soul-deep weariness. "I'm afraid the situation is quite dire. The tests indicate that Lila's condition is terminal and progressing far more rapidly than we could have anticipated." A weighted pause lingered in the air as I observed Connor and Alex through shuttered lashes, desperate to drink in their reactions. To my dismay, however, they remained as unreadable and impassive as carved granite monoliths, their expressions utterly inscrutable. Until, that is, the moment I spoke the words that would ultimately shatter their smug facades of indifference. "Given the circumstances," I said, my voice a tremulous whisper that still managed to command the room's attention, "I've decided to amend my will, effective immediately." Connor's head whipped towards me, eyes narrowing to serpentine slits of pure avarice. "Oh, and just what changes did you have in mind, dear?" A tremulous exhalation, punctuated by a sickly, bone-rattling cough that doubled me over, draining what little color remained from my ashen features. When I finally straightened, clutching Eva's arm for support, a muscle twitched in the hinge of Connor's jaw, the barest flickering betrayal of the disquiet roiling within him. "My entire estate," my gaze drifted across them with pointed finality, "is to be awarded to the Wilkinson Charitable Foundation upon my death." The silence that followed was deafening, cavernous, charged with a tension so palpable it seemed to suck the very air from the room. I watched in morbid fascination as the blood drained from Connor and Alex's faces, their complexions taking on the sickly pallor of profound shock. For years they had viewed me as nothing more than a means to an end, a gilded path to wealth and prosperity that could be exploited at their leisure. Now, with the rug so violently swept from beneath their feet, they found themselves disoriented, unmoored, vulnerable, in a way they never could have anticipated. The perfect prelude for my ultimate masterstroke, I mused, savoring their stunned disarray. Just a few more deft maneuvers, and this whole sordid theater would reach its thrilling, cataclysmic climax. In the aftermath of my bombshell revelation regarding the amended will, the atmosphere in our home congealed into a noxious fog of barely contained resentment and desperation. Connor and Alex slunk about the house like feral animals caught in a snare, their movements increasingly erratic and furtive as the days passed. I observed their escalating mania from afar, a silent specter bearing witness as the full weight of their impending loss took root in their blackened psyches. The abuse I had endured, the wounds they had inflicted, all could now be glimpsed in the naked despair marring their once smug countenances. At times their fear and uncertainty would erupt in volcanic paroxysms of unbridled rage, hostile silences shattered by bellowed accusations and furniture-rattling tantrums. When the storms passed, they would inevitably retreat to their respective corners, no doubt scheming new ways to claw back some semblance of control. "You deceitful harpy," Connor raged one morning, slamming his fist on the kitchen counter with enough force to make the plates clatter. "This is your revenge, isn't it? Finally showing your true colors." I met his venom with an impassive stare, my pallid features betraying no reaction as he stalked around the island towards me. Up close, the desperation clinging to his scent was suffocating, underpinned by the sourness of stale whiskey and bitter perspiration. Without a word, I turned and shuffled from the room, every ounce of effort channeled into maintaining my aura of haggard frailty. Let him rage and bluster all he liked. I was beyond the reach of his pitiful intimidation tactics. As my supposed condition appeared to deteriorate further in the ensuing days, Connor and Alex grew only more monstrous in their behavior. Objects were hurled, obscenities screamed with unrestrained virulence. Through it all, Eva remained my steadfast ally, her comforting presence and wise counsel serving as an invaluable bulwark against the maelstrom of toxicity swirling around us. "Stay the course," she murmured one evening as we huddled in the guest room, the muffled shouts of yet another father-son altercation raging beyond the door. "They're coming undone, Lila. You can see it in their eyes." I could indeed, and the realization flooded me with a perverse sort of gratification. For all their feigned indifference and callous disdain, they were merely rapacious vermin scurrying after the crumbs of my hard-earned fortune. Now that the prize had been snatched from their grasping claws, their true wretched natures were being laid bare. It seemed Connor and Alex would stop at nothing to reclaim their coveted windfall, no path too depraved or unethical to traverse. I lost track of the shady associates who began slinking through our doorway at all hours, the heated exchanges punctuated by furtive glances in my direction. At the heart of their desperate scheming, I could see the festering seed of avarice warring with something even more primal, an insatiable, animalistic hunger to reassert their dominance through whatever twisted means necessary. On more than one occasion, I returned from a trip out with Eva to find evidence that they had been rummaging through my affairs, desperation overriding any semblance of discretion. Documents disturbed, jewelry cases left ajar like gaping maws, every inch of my private space violated in their frantic search. Did they truly believe they could find some hidden loophole to circumvent the terms of my will? Or had their madness progressed to such a degree that they would stoop to pillaging my possessions to sate their thirst in the interim? Either way, I recognized their self-destructive flailings for what they truly were: the death rattles of condemned men who simply refused to accept their well-deserved fate. And with every feeble grasping at straws, they only bound themselves tighter in the inescapable noose of karma's brutal recompense. Soon, their options would be well and truly exhausted. Soon, they would have nowhere left to turn, no more depraved avenues left to pursue in their desperate bid for salvation. When that moment of utter defeat and hopelessness dawned, I would be waiting, a merciless specter poised to deliver the death blow that would finally irrevocably shatter their distorted delusions of entitlement. For now, though, I was content to sit in patient judgment as their world crumbled around them, fueled by the cold certainty that the most exquisite reckonings are often wrought through the unhurried machinations of fate itself. The day of reckoning arrived not with the earth-shattering cataclysm I had halfway anticipated, but with an almost anticlimactic banality. One moment, Connor and Alex seethed before me like two rabid dogs straining at their leashes, their vitriolic threats and obscenities dripping with malice. The next, the door behind me swung open to admit a stern-faced cavalcade of law enforcement officers bristling with grim purpose. "Connor Grayson? Alexander Grayson?" The gruff bark sliced through the volatile miasma like a blade. "You're both under arrest." For a suspended moment, a breath of stunned silence bloomed amidst the chaos. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, pandemonium erupted anew. "This is preposterous." Connor's voice, always so polished and controlled, warped into a guttural rasp of disbelief. "On what grounds?" "Fraud, extortion, attempted murder." The lead detective met my gaze over the pair's shoulders, a silent look of acknowledgement passing between us. "I'm sure the charges will become more extensive as the evidence gets processed." As the harsh realities crystallized in the air with each damning accusation, Connor and Alex seemed to shrink in on themselves. The bluster evaporated, the towering swagger diminished, until they resembled nothing more than a pair of petulant, ill-mannered children caught with their hands in the proverbial cookie jar. "You," Alex hissed, feral eyes swiveling in my direction as he struggled against the restraints being secured around his wrists. "This is your doing, you vindictive bye." The slurring profanity was abruptly swallowed as he was wrenched back, a meaty forearm clamping across his throat to stifle the torrent of vitriol. I watched in silence, unmoved, as father and son were forcibly subdued and Frog marched out of my home in a humiliating tangle of flailing limbs. Their baleful glares scorched my unruffled facade like twin blowtorches of pure, undistilled hatred. But I felt nothing. No fear, no anger, no pity. Only a profound sense of closure, of karmic release, as the toxic presences that had tainted my existence for far too long were finally purged from the premises. When the turmoil of their forced exodus had subsided, Eva emerged from the shadows to rest a comforting hand on my shoulder. "It's over, Layla," she murmured, squeezing gently. "You're free of them at last." I nodded, the words hardly registering as the weight of what had transpired finally settled over me in a cascading rush. It was done. The nightmare had been excised, the scales of justice finally balanced through the most deliciously poetic of resolutions. And in the wake of that exquisitely calibrated release, I felt nothing. No soaring elation, no swell of vindicated triumph. Just a yawning, cavernous absence where their malignant influence had once reigned. As the authorities conducted their thorough search, meticulously documenting the mountain of evidence I had so carefully curated over the past weeks and months, the harsh realities of Connor and Alex's crimes were laid bare in exacting detail. From the insidious financial improprieties and fraud all the way through to the most heinous deception of all, their despicable plot to poison me and abscond with my estate. With every passing revelation, I felt a subtle sense of lightness pervade my being, a lifting of the oppressive burdens and torments I had shouldered for far too long. By the time the investigators had finished exhaling their findings and departed with stifling courtroom formalities, I felt utterly untethered, buoyed aloft by an ethereal sense of liberation. Only one matter remained unresolved. When Dr. Harris arrived at the house much later that evening, his features were etched into a mask of harrowed apprehension. In his eyes, I witnessed the gnawing dread of a man ensnared in circumstances far beyond his control, the realization that he had been an unwitting pawn in the grandest of deceptions. His voice cracked under the weight of his turmoil before he drew a steadying breath. "I don't know what to say, Leela, when they told me the truth." Raising a hand, I waved away his concerns with an airy gesture of dismissal. "Think nothing of it, Samuel. You were a means to an end, one I deeply regret having to exploit, but a necessity nonetheless." The doctor's throat bobbed as he absorbed my words, the tension seeming to bleed from his frame with each passing second. "Then it's true?" he asked at last, a glimmer of lucidity piercing the fog of trepidation clouding his gaze. "This was all just an elaborate ruse? A scheme to expose them and their misdeeds?" A faint smile tugged at the corners of my mouth as I rose from my seat, suddenly revitalized and suffused with a renewed sense of purpose and vitality. "A woman's got to protect herself, Samuel. Surely you can understand that." And with those parting words, I swept from the room, shedding the cocoon of frailty and deception to greet the next chapter of my existence, one brilliantly unencumbered and replete with the heady promise of reinvention. After all, I mused as I gazed out over the sun-dappled expanse of my perfectly manicured estate, a new dawn was breaking, and I would be damned if I didn't greet it with open arms, finally unfurled from the shackles of a past I never should have endured. "You're overreacting as always. Can't you just get over it and move on?" Bryce's dismissive words hit me like a slap across the face. I stared at him in disbelief, my chest tightening as the all-too-familiar frustration boiled within me. How many times had I pleaded with him to understand what I was going through with my health issues? How many nights did I cry myself to sleep, longing for his compassion and support? "Get over it," I echoed, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Bryce, I'm in constant pain. The fatigue is crippling. I can't just get over a chronic condition that modern medicine still doesn't fully comprehend." Bryce rolled his eyes, his expression a mixture of annoyance and indifference. Yeah, I've heard it all before. You really need to stop using that as an excuse for everything." My hands trembled as a wave of anger washed over me. An excuse? Did he truly believe I was making up the suffering I endured day after day, year after year? "You know what? I'm done," I said, my voice quivering with pent-up emotion. "I'm done trying to make you understand something you clearly have no interest in comprehending." Bryce scoffed and turned his attention back to the television, effectively dismissing me and my struggles once again. I stormed out of the living room, fighting back tears of frustration and hurt. As I made my way to the bedroom, memories of our once loving relationship flooded my mind. Where was the man who had vowed to love and support me through sickness and health? The one who had held me close and promised to always be by my side? That man was long gone, replaced by this shell of a person who seemed to care more about maintaining the perfect facade than truly being there for his wife. I collapsed onto the bed, burying my face in the pillow as sobs racked my body. How had we come to this? How had the love and understanding we once shared disintegrated into this bitter, toxic dynamic? As I lay there, a newfound determination took root within me. I couldn't continue living like this, constantly invalidated and disrespected by the person who was supposed to be my partner in life. Enough was enough. I sat up, wiping away the tears, and reached for the journal I had been keeping over the past few years. With trembling hands, I began to document this latest incident, determined to gather evidence of Bryce's emotional abuse. The dismissive comments, the lack of empathy, the constant belittling of my struggles, I would record it all. This would be the start of my journey towards reclaiming my dignity and self-worth. I would no longer be a victim, cowering in the face of Bryce's cruelty. It was time to take a stand, to expose the truth, and to seek justice for the years of pain and neglect I had endured. The words flowed from my pen, fueled by a potent mix of anger, heartache, and a newfound sense of resolve. This was the final straw, the catalyst for the upheaval that was about to unfold. I was done being the silent, suffering wife. It was time for Bryce to face the consequences of his actions. I should have seen the signs earlier, but love can blind even the most perceptive of souls. Bryce and I had been a perfect match in the beginning, two kindred spirits, united in our hopes and dreams for the future. We'd feed off each other's energy, our laughter filling the air as we built the foundation of what we thought would be an unbreakable bond. How naive I had been. The first crack appeared shortly after our wedding, when I began exhibiting strange symptoms that no doctor could properly diagnose. The debilitating fatigue, the widespread pain, the cognitive issues. They all remained an unsolvable mystery, an invisible enemy waging war on my body and mind. At first, Bryce was sympathetic, assuring me that we would get through this together. "In sickness and in health, remember?" he would say, holding me close as I cried from the frustration of not understanding what was happening to me. Those tender moments became rarer as the years passed, and my condition only worsened. Bryce grew increasingly distant, frustrated by the lack of a clear solution. His patience wore thin, and the man I had fallen in love with slowly faded away, replaced by someone cold and callous. "Quit making excuses and pull yourself together," he snapped one day when I struggled to complete a simple household chore. "You're letting this supposed illness control your life." Yeah, I tried to explain, to make him understand the genuine anguish I was experiencing, but he would hear none of it. In his eyes, I had become a burden, a blight on the perfect life he had envisioned for us. Outward appearances meant everything to Bryce. He couldn't bear the thought of our family being perceived as anything less than perfect, even as our son Derek grew increasingly aware of the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. "Why is Dad always so angry with you?" Derek asked me once, his eyes full of concern. I forced a smile, not wanting to tarnish his image of his father. "It's nothing, sweetheart. He's just under a lot of stress at work." The lies piled up, each one a brick in the facade Bryce was so desperate to maintain. We were the perfect family, with the perfect house and the perfect life. At least, that's what we wanted the world to believe. Behind closed doors, the reality was far more sinister. "You're pathetic, you know that?" Bryce snarled at me one evening after I had spent the day bedridden, too weak and in too much pain to function. "This is just a convenient way for you to be lazy and avoid your responsibilities." His words cut deeper than any knife, reopening the wounds of inadequacy that his emotional abuse had inflicted over the years. I wanted to scream, to hurl every ounce of anguish back in his face, but the strength had long since been drained from me. So I remained silent, my tears the only outward display of the turmoil raging within. That's when I knew the man I had married was gone, consumed by his obsession with maintaining the illusion of perfection. The love and support I had once treasured had been replaced by disdain and contempt, all because I couldn't meet his warped expectations. In that moment, a small spark of defiance ignited within me, a glimmer of determination that would grow into an all-consuming blaze. I wouldn't stay trapped in this toxic cycle any longer. One way or another, I would strip away Bryce's carefully constructed facade and expose the ugliness that festered beneath. He would face the consequences of his actions, of the years of emotional torment he had inflicted upon me. The road ahead would be arduous, but I knew in my heart that it was the only path to reclaiming my dignity and self-worth. The mask of perfection would shatter, and the truth would finally be laid bare, no matter the cost. The facade Bryce had so carefully constructed was beginning to crumble. As my health deteriorated further, it became impossible for me to keep up the charade of being the perfect wife and homemaker. Simple tasks like cooking and cleaning left me utterly drained, my body feeling like a leadweight that refused to cooperate. Of course, this only added fuel to Bryce's disdain. What's the point of having you around if you can't even take care of basic household duties? He sneered, surveying the pile of unwashed dishes in the sink. I wanted to explain, to make him understand the sheer effort it took for me just to get through each day, but I knew it would fall on deaf ears. Bryce had made up his mind about my condition long ago. In his eyes, it was nothing more than a convenient excuse. "I'm sorry," I mustered, hating how weak and defeated I sounded. "I'll try harder, I promise." Bryce scoffed and shook his head in disgust. "Save your empty promises. You've been trying harder for years, yet nothing ever changes." The venom in his words cut deep, but I remained silent, too emotionally and physically drained to engage in another fruitless argument. As the weeks passed, Bryce's insults and complaints escalated, each one chipping away at what little self-worth I had left. I found solace in my journal, pouring out the anguish and frustration that I couldn't voice aloud. It was during one of these writing sessions that Derek knocked on my bedroom door, a concerned look etched on his face. "Mom, are you okay? I heard Dad yelling at you again." I fought back the tears that threatened to spill and forced a reassuring smile. "Everything's fine, honey. Your father's just been under a lot of stress lately." Derek didn't look convinced, but he nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a sadness that no child should ever have to bear. As he left, I couldn't help but wonder how much of Bryce's behavior he had witnessed over the years. Had I been naive in thinking I could shield him from the harsh reality of our crumbling marriage? That night, as Bryce slept soundly beside me, I stayed awake, my mind racing with a newfound determination. I couldn't continue living like this, constantly demeaned and belittled by the man who was supposed to love and cherish me. Enough was enough. I reached for my journal, the pages now filled with a meticulous documentation of Bryce's emotional abuse. Every cutting remark, every dismissive gesture, every act of cruelty laid bare in ink. As I flipped through the pages, a sense of empowerment washed over me. This was my evidence, my ammunition in the battle I was about to wage against the man who had made my life a living hell. I wouldn't be the silent, suffering wife any longer. It was time to take action, to expose Bryce for the monster he had become and seek justice for the years of pain and neglect he had inflicted upon me. The first step would be to confide in my sister, Jenna. She had always been my rock, my unwavering support system through the darkest of times. With her by my side, I knew I would have the strength to face whatever lay ahead. A plan began to form in my mind, the pieces slowly falling into place. I would gather every shred of evidence, every damning proof of Bryce's vile behavior, until I had an airtight case against him. Then, and only then, would I strike, shattering his carefully constructed facade and exposing the ugliness that festered beneath. It would be a long and arduous road, but I was ready to fight. For too long, I had been the victim, cowering in fear and shame. But no more. This time, justice would be mine. Our 20th wedding anniversary should have been a joyous occasion, a celebration of the love and commitment that had carried us through 2 decades of marriage. Instead, it became a painful reminder of how far Bryce and I had drifted apart. He had insisted on going out to an upscale restaurant, wanting to maintain the facade of a happy, successful couple in front of our friends and family. I had reluctantly agreed, knowing full well that any objection on my part would only ignite another heated argument. As I slowly made my way down the stairs, the simple act of getting dressed and ready had left me utterly drained. Bryce was waiting at the bottom, drumming his fingers impatiently against his watch. "It's about time," he grumbled, eyeing my weary appearance with disdain. "We're already running late." I mustered an apologetic smile, too exhausted to offer any excuses. We made our way to the restaurant in silence, the tension between us palpable. The evening only grew more excruciating as it progressed. Bryce basked in the attention of our guests, regaling them with tales of his career successes, while I sat quietly, sipping water to quell the nausea that had taken hold. At one point, our friend Jennifer turned to me with a warm smile. "Marla, you must be so proud of Bryce and everything he's accomplished." Before I could respond, Bryce cut in with a bitter chuckle. If only she put in half as much effort into our marriage as I do at work. The table fell silent, a collective tension hanging in the air. I felt the blood drain from my face as Bryce's words sank in, each one a dagger to my already fragile heart. "Excuse me?" I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Bryce shook his head in mock disappointment. "Come on, Marla. We all know you've been using your little condition as an excuse to be lazy and neglect your duties as a wife." The venom in his tone was unmistakable, laying bare the contempt he harbored for me and my struggles. I wanted to scream, to hurl his cruelty back in his face, but the shock had rendered me mute. Our friends and family shifted uncomfortably, averting their gazes as the once celebratory atmosphere turned toxic. No one dared to intervene, to call out Bryce's abhorrent behavior. He leaned back in his chair, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. "See? She can't even defend herself. Pathetic." Those words would haunt me for years to come, searing themselves into my memory like a brand. In that moment, everything became crystallized. The years of emotional abuse, the gaslighting, the utter disregard for my well-being. As I sat there, humiliated and defeated, something within me shifted. A fire ignited in the depths of my soul, a burning rage that had been simmering for far too long. Enough was enough. I would no longer be Bryce's punching bag, his victim to be ridiculed and demeaned at his whim. The gloves were coming off, and I would stop at nothing to bring him to his knees, to make him suffer as he had made me suffer for so long. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, my mind already plotting my vengeance. Bryce continued to revel in his cruelty, oblivious to the storm brewing within me. As we arrived home, I went straight to my room, locking the door behind me. I reached for my journal, my hands trembling, as I began to document every agonizing detail of the night's events. This would be the tipping point, the catalyst that would set my plan into motion. Bryce had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and he would pay dearly for his transgressions. I would gather every shred of evidence, every recorded instance of his emotional and psychological torture. Then, when the time was right, I would unleash it all upon him, shattering his world and leaving him to contend with the consequences of his actions. No more suffering in silence, no more being the victim. It was time for Bryce to face the wrath he had so recklessly provoked. In the days following our disastrous anniversary dinner, I could feel a shift taking place within me. The years of pent-up anger and resentment had finally reached a boiling point, igniting a fire that burned with the intensity of 1,000 suns. Bryce, oblivious as ever, carried on as if nothing had happened. He went about his daily routine, leaving for work each morning with a casual "see you later" tossed over his shoulder. Meanwhile, I stewed in my righteous fury, meticulously documenting every instance of his cruelty in my journal. It was during one of these writing sessions that Jenna stopped by unannounced. She took one look at my reddened eyes and the turmoil etched into my features before enveloping me in a tight embrace. "Oh, Marla," she murmured, her voice laced with concern. "What's going on?" I pulled away, steeling myself against the torrent of emotion that threatened to spill forth. "It's Bryce," I began, the words tumbling out in a rush. He humiliated me, Jenna, in front of everyone at our anniversary dinner." Jenna's brow furrowed as I recounted the painful details, her expression darkening with each word. By the time I had finished, her hands were balled into tight fists, trembling with barely contained rage. "That bastard," she hissed, her eyes blazing with a protective fury. "How could he treat you like that? After everything you've been through?" I shook my head, feeling a sudden surge of determination. "I can't live like this anymore, Jenna. The emotional abuse, the constant belittling, it has to stop." Jenna nodded, her jaw set in a firm line. "You're right. Enough is enough. What are you going to do?" A plan had already begun to take shape in my mind, a meticulously crafted blueprint for revenge. "I'm going to gather evidence," I explained, my voice steady and resolute. "Every recording, every journal entry, every shred of proof of Bryce's cruelty. Then, when the time is right, I'm going to unleash it all and watch his world crumble around him." Jenna's eyes widened, a mixture of shock and admiration flickering across her features. "Marla, are you sure about this? This is a nuclear option. There's no going back once you pull the trigger." I nodded, my jaw clenched with grim determination. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Bryce needs to face the consequences of his actions, of the years of emotional torture he's put me through. He needs to be exposed for the monster he truly is. A slow smile spread across Jenna's face, a fierce pride radiating from her very being. "Okay, sis, I'm in. Whatever you need, I've got your back." Relief washed over me, knowing that I wouldn't be facing this battle alone. With Jenna by my side, I felt an overwhelming sense of strength, a certainty that I would emerge victorious. Over the next few weeks, we worked tirelessly, gathering every scrap of evidence we could find. Journals, recordings, photographs, nothing was left out. We built an ironclad case against Bryce, one that would leave no room for doubt or denial. As our arsenal grew, so too did my sense of empowerment. The fear and shame that had once shackled me began to dissipate, replaced by a burning desire for justice and retribution. Bryce remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing, carrying on with his daily routine as if nothing were amiss. He would sneer at me whenever our paths crossed, his lips curling in a contemptuous sneer that only fueled my determination. "What's the matter, Marla?" he would taunt. "Still wallowing in self-pity, I see." I would meet his gaze, unflinching, biting back the biting retort that danced on the tip of my tongue. Soon, I told myself. Soon, he would pay for every ounce of pain and humiliation he had inflicted upon me. As the final pieces of our plan fell into place, I felt a sense of exhilaration coursing through my veins. The day of reckoning was fast approaching, and Bryce had no idea what was in store. He had made the mistake of underestimating me, of believing that I would cower and submit to his abuse forever. But no more. This time, I would be the one holding all the cards, and Bryce would learn the true meaning of suffering. The facade he had so carefully constructed was about to come crashing down, and I would be the one wielding the sledgehammer. The day of reckoning had finally arrived, and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Jenna and I had spent weeks meticulously planning every detail, leaving no stone unturned in our quest for justice. It was the annual Wyatt family reunion, a gathering that Bryce had always insisted on attending, despite our crumbling marriage. This year, however, the event would serve as the perfect stage for his downfall. As we pulled into the driveway of my parents' home, I could see the familiar faces of extended family members already gathered on the lawn. Bryce plastered on his usual charming smile, ever the master of deception. "Remember, honey," he murmured, leaning in close, "we have to keep up appearances. No need to burden everyone with our personal issues." I fought back the urge to recoil from his touch, nodding in feigned agreement. Little did he know, the facade he had so carefully cultivated was about to be shattered beyond repair. We mingled with the crowd, making small talk and accepting well wishes from relatives we hadn't seen in ages. All the while, Jenna and I exchanged covert glances, silently signaling that it was time to put our plan into motion. After the initial greetings had concluded, Jenna cleared her throat, calling for everyone's attention. "If I could have a moment, please," she began, her voice ringing out across the lawn. "There's something important that needs to be addressed." Bryce shot me a quizzical look, but I remained impassive, my expression betraying nothing. "For too long, a grave injustice has been allowed to fester within our family," Jenna continued, her gaze sweeping across the gathered crowd. An injustice that we can no longer turn a blind eye to. Murmurs of confusion rippled through the crowd, but Jenna pressed on, undeterred. Bryce Wyatt has been emotionally and psychologically abusing his wife, Marla, for years. Today, we're going to put an end to his cruelty, once and for all. A hush fell over the gathering as Jenna's words sank in. Bryce's face contorted in a mixture of shock and outrage, but before he could interject, Jenna was already unveiling our carefully curated evidence. Audio recordings of Bryce's vicious tirades filled the air, his voice dripping with venom and contempt as he hurled insult after insult at me. Documented journal entries detailing the years of emotional torment were passed around, laying bare the depths of his cruelty. And then, the pièce de résistance, the video footage from our anniversary dinner, capturing Bryce's public humiliation in all its excruciating detail. As the scene played out on the screen, gasps and murmurs of outrage echoed through the crowd. Bryce stood frozen, his mouth agape as the carefully constructed facade he had so meticulously maintained came crashing down around him. "How could you?" My mother's voice cut through the tension, her eyes brimming with tears. "How could you treat my daughter that way?" Bryce stammered, grasping for an excuse, but no words came. He was a cornered animal, his true nature finally exposed for all to see. One by one, family members turned their backs on him, their expressions a mix of disgust and disbelief. Bryce's once charming demeanor had been stripped away, revealing the ugly truth that had been lurking beneath all along. As the weight of his actions bore down upon him, Bryce's veneer of confidence crumbled. He turned to me, his eyes pleading for mercy, for understanding. "Marla, please," he began, but I held up a hand, silencing him. "Enough," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "You've had your chance to be a decent human being, and you squandered it. Now you're going to face the consequences of your actions." Bryce opened his mouth to protest, but thought better of it. In that moment, he knew he had lost the respect of his family, lost the facade of perfection he had so desperately clung to, lost any semblance of control over the situation. As he slunk away, a broken and defeated man, I felt a surge of vindication wash over me. Justice had been served, and the years of suffering and humiliation had finally been avenged. Jenna pulled me into a fierce embrace, her eyes shining with pride. "You did it, sis," she whispered. "You took that bastard down." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, but for the first time in years I felt truly free. Free from the shackles of Bryce's emotional abuse, free to reclaim my life and dignity. As the crowd dispersed, offering words of support and encouragement, I knew that this was just the beginning. Bryce's downfall was merely the first step in a journey towards healing and empowerment, and I was ready to embrace it, one step at a time. In the days following the explosive family reunion, the fallout from Bryce's exposure was swift and unrelenting. His life, once so meticulously constructed to project an image of perfection, lay in shattered ruins around him. I, on the other hand, felt a sense of liberation unlike anything I had experienced before. For years I had been shackled by Bryce's emotional abuse, my spirit slowly eroded by his cruelty. But now, with the truth laid bare, I was finally free. The first order of business was securing a divorce. Jenna had put me in touch with a formidable legal team, and within a matter of days the paperwork was filed. Bryce, still reeling from the public humiliation, offered little resistance. "You're making a mistake," he muttered during one of our brief encounters, his eyes downcast and defeated. "Think about what this will do to Derek." I leveled my gaze at him, feeling no shred of sympathy for the man who had tormented me for years. "I am thinking about Derek," I replied, my voice unwavering, "and I'm doing what's best for him, removing him from an environment of toxicity and abuse." Bryce flinched as if he had been struck, but I pressed on, relentless. "You've only got yourself to blame for this, Bryce. Your actions have consequences, whether you choose to acknowledge them or not." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving him to stew in the wreckage of his own making. As news of our impending divorce spread, the backlash against Bryce intensified. Friends and colleagues who had once praised his accomplishments now distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with a man exposed as an emotional abuser. Even Derek, our once doting son, could no longer bring himself to look his father in the eye. "How could you treat Mom like that?" he asked during one of their strained encounters, his voice thick with emotion. "She sacrificed everything for this family, and you just... Words failed him, but his expression spoke volumes. The hero worship he had once held for Bryce had been shattered, replaced by a profound sense of disappointment and betrayal. Bryce, for his part, tried to cling to the tattered remnants of his former life. He lashed out at me, accusing me of turning his own family against him, of poisoning their minds with lies and deceit. "You're a vindictive, spiteful woman," he snarled during one of his tirades. "You'll regret this, Marla. Mark my words." But his threats rang hollow, devoid of the power and menace they once held. I simply stared back at him, unmoved by his pathetic attempts at intimidation. "I don't regret a thing, Bryce," I replied, my voice laced with a steely resolve. "For the first time in years, I'm living in the truth, something you've clearly never been able to handle." His face contorted in a mask of rage, but I had already turned away, leaving him to wallow in his own self-pity and delusion. With each passing day, Bryce's world continued to crumble around him. His once thriving career began to unravel as clients and business partners severed ties, unwilling to be associated with such a tarnished reputation. It was a sight to behold, watching this once proud man brought to his knees by the very demons he had unleashed upon me. And yet I felt no pity, no shred of remorse for the suffering he now endured. This was justice, pure and simple, a reckoning long overdue. As the divorce proceedings neared their conclusion, I found myself reflecting on the long and arduous journey that had led me to this point. The years of suffering, the constant belittling and emotional abuse, the endless nights spent wondering where the man I had married had gone. But now, as I prepared to embark on a new chapter of my life, those memories seemed to fade into the distance. The shackles that had once bound me had been broken, and I was finally free to spread my wings and soar. Jenna pulled me into a fierce embrace as the final papers were signed, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and relief. "You did it, sis," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You survived the storm, and you came out stronger on the other side." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope, a belief that better days lay ahead, free from the toxicity and cruelty that had once defined my existence. As I stepped out into the world, a newfound sense of empowerment coursed through my veins. I was a survivor, a warrior who had faced the darkness head-on and emerged victorious. And Bryce? Well, he was nothing more than a footnote in my story, a mere obstacle that had been overcome, a reminder of the strength and resilience that burned within me. The future was mine to shape, and I intended to seize it with both hands, leaving the pain and suffering of the past far behind me. A new chapter was about to begin, and I couldn't wait to see what it had in store. Chapter 8: A New Beginning. The divorce had been finalized, and with it, a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I was officially free from the shackles of Bryce's emotional abuse, free to start anew and reshape my life on my own terms. Of course, that didn't mean the process was easy. There were still hurdles to overcome, lingering scars from years of torment that would take time to heal. But I was committed to the journey, fueled by a newfound sense of determination and self-worth. The first order of business was securing a favorable settlement, one that would provide me with the financial means to build the life I deserved. Jenna's legal team had proven their mettle, negotiating a generous payout that encompassed a sizable portion of our shared assets. "You earned every penny of this, Marla," Jenna assured me as we reviewed the settlement details. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I nodded, still somewhat in disbelief that this chapter of my life was truly coming to a close. For so long I had been trapped in a cycle of fear and self-doubt, conditioned by Bryce's emotional manipulations to believe that I deserved nothing better. But now, with the evidence of his cruelty laid bare and the law on my side, I could finally break free from those toxic thought patterns. I was worthy of happiness, of respect, of building a life on my own terms. With the financial security provided by the settlement, I made the decision to invest a portion of the funds into a cause close to my heart, a foundation dedicated to supporting others suffering from the same chronic condition that had once been the catalyst for Bryce's abuse. It was a way for me to turn my pain into purpose, to ensure that no one else would have to endure the isolation and emotional torment that I had faced for so many years. "This is amazing, Mom," Derek said, his eyes shining with pride as we toured the Foundation's newly opened headquarters. "I can't think of a better way to help people and raise awareness." I pulled him into a tight embrace, overwhelmed by the surge of emotions welling up within me. For too long, I had shielded Derek from the harsh realities of my marriage, desperate to preserve his image of his father. But now, with the truth laid bare, we were able to forge a deeper connection, built on honesty and mutual respect. "Thank you, sweetheart," I murmured, fighting back tears of joy. "Your support means everything to me." As the Foundation took shape and our outreach efforts began in earnest, I found myself bearing witness to the incredible resilience of the human spirit. The stories I encountered, the tales of perseverance in the face of overwhelming adversity, only served to strengthen my own resolve. I was no longer the broken, downtrodden woman who had once cowered in fear of her husband's wrath. I was a survivor, a warrior who had emerged from the ashes of emotional abuse, stronger and more determined than ever before. And Bryce? Well, his fate had been sealed the moment he chose to prioritize his own selfish desires over the well-being of his family. The once powerful businessman had become a pariah, his reputation in tatters and his professional prospects all but non-existent. I caught glimpses of him from time to time, a mere shadow of his former self, disheveled, haunted by the demons of his own making. Our paths would cross, and for a fleeting moment our eyes would meet, a silent acknowledgement of the chasm that now separated us. But I felt no pity, no remorse for the man who had inflicted so much pain and suffering upon me. This was the bed he had made for himself, and now he would lie in it, forever haunted by the consequences of his actions. As for me, I was focused on the future, a future that seemed brighter and more promising with each passing day. The Foundation continued to grow, its reach extending to communities across the country, offering solace and support to those who had once felt so alone. And at the center of it all was a woman reborn, a phoenix risen from the ashes of emotional turmoil, spreading her wings and soaring towards new horizons. It was a new beginning, a fresh start that had been hard-won through years of struggle and perseverance. And as I looked ahead, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this point. The road had been long and arduous, but in the end, justice had prevailed. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my sense of self-worth, and for that, I would be forever grateful. A new chapter was unfolding, and I intended to embrace it wholeheartedly, leaving the pain and anguish of the past firmly behind me. The future was mine, and I couldn't wait to see what it had in store.